We have a great panel to get us started off this morning. I won't read their bios, you have them in front of you, and we want to maximize the time that we have for each presenter. Each presenter will have 10 minutes for their presentation, and then we will have time for questions and answers after they finish. Our esteemed panelists, and they will go in the order of that I've pronounced their names. Our first speaker will be Liz Plater-Zyberk, who is an FAIA Malcolm Matheson Distinguished Professor of Architecture at the University of Miami. Our second presenter is Katie Hagemann. She's the Sustainability Coordinator for Miami-Dade County, exactly. Our third speaker is Amy Knowles, and Amy is the Deputy Resiliency Officer for the City of Miami Beach. Our fourth speaker is Hana Escrow, and she serves as the Florida Market President for Gorman and Company Incorporated. And our final presenter is Ms. Isabel Casio Carballo, Executive Director of the South Florida Regional Council. So each one of our presenters has slides that they are presenting, and they will not be able to see them if they remain on the panel. So if you would like to sit in the audience up close, they're going to be able to, they're going to be able to see them on the floor. Okay, great, because I was told they wouldn't be able to see them. Okay.
I gave you misinformation.
Okay. So they will be able to see them. So, so let's go ahead and we'll start with Liz. She's going to start us off today.
So what a wonderful series of introductions to this event and to the topics. Of course, some of you may know me as a founder of the Congress for the New Urbanism, and so our organization, which just met in Detroit, is delighted to think that the whole world now has a new urban agenda. And many of us have been contributing to it in the meetings leading up to this October event, and so we're very pleased to be part of that picture. My role this morning is to introduce this panel with background information framing the topic to be covered by the subsequent panelists. I will do so by providing a bit of the experience of our regional efforts here in South Florida related to resilience. The panelists will then follow with more information about their work in Miami-Dade County, City of Miami Beach, with affordable housing and regional transportation. At the outset, I would like to point out that while the stresses of climate, which include disease, economy, flooding, drought, it's a long list, it depends where you are, and other unpredictable change, have always been a part of human history, the current knowledge of climate change provides the advantage of a certain amount of predictability. Although the predictions may not be precise, we can see it coming, and we can identify potential impacts, even if the timing is not exact. It's beginning to remind me of biblical stories about having your lamp filled with oil, just in case. We can plan for climate change, for its impacts, and we can build resilience. From a South Florida perspective, we do not need to be caught unawares. We can avoid becoming the coastal equivalent of the American Rust Belt. So, I thought as the first speaker that maybe it would be a good idea just to start the framing with the definition, and so I didn't go to my old book dictionary, but of course Wikipedia, to see how resilience is defined. The first resilience definition is short and very clearly understandable. Climate resilience takes a little bit more explanation. It speaks to socio-ecological systems. The UN's agenda is thinking in terms of systems. and it's about absorbing and adapting to stresses. I'm assuming that what print I put up is large enough for you to read it, that I don't need to read everything. But perhaps I should have also emphasized the word improve the sustainability of the system, because that's what I would like to focus on. So the title of the panel is Responding to Shocks and Building Resilience, and I'd like to spend a little time on how responding to shocks builds resilience. That's something that we have some experience in Florida, crisscrossed by hurricanes during my 40 years here. I think we've discovered that those shocks expose weaknesses. They can also galvanize the community. They attract resources. I don't know how long we can count on that. And produce improvements in the long run that might otherwise be difficult to initiate without that shock. And so I'll speak to some of that experience here. I think for the people in the room, probably the first one that we experienced in some large way was Hurricane Andrew in 1992. I remember our FEMA director calling Washington and saying, send down the troops, because nobody knew what to do. Followed by, in 2005, Hurricanes Katrina and Wilma. You probably didn't hear about Wilma so much because Katrina was so overwhelming. But it galvanized our community, and one of our community leaders, Harvey Reuven, in 2006, started the Climate Change Advisory Task Force. And I think that's about the time that we began thinking of all of these shocks as the beginning of thinking about long-term resilience. So you'll hear about the green print from others, the climate compact. We always thought in that committee there needed to be some centralized manner of approaching these things, and I will show you some of the other items. In '93, following Katrina, one of these initiatives that never would have happened without that event is this new community in South Miami-Dade County called Jordan Commons. It's a Habitat for Humanity community, but it was produced by gifts from this community and foundation funding that came to Florida after the hurricane. 500 people live on 160 acres in a classic new urbanist plan. Everybody has a front porch facing the street. There are 4 small neighborhood parks and 1 large community park with a community center. Those ideas and that experience was later taken by the Congress for the New Urbanism with over 100 participants in post-Hurricane Katrina Mississippi Renewal, which looked at a 5-state area, a large, in the case of Mississippi, a coast of multiple municipalities. And one of those results was FEMA funding to build the Katrina cottages, which were developed in that charrette, instead of trailers, the kind of toxic trailers that were being, in which their toxicity was being discovered at that time. They had over 3,000 units of these Katrina cottages built in those states. So how does this relate to climate change? How does that experience bring us to climate change? We know that there are 2 responses, mitigation and adaptation. I think the slides kind of say it all. Mitigation, what to do to slow climate change and lower stabilization level. These are universal generators and universal action. So everybody around the world can work on mitigation. I would say that we didn't have very much hope for mitigation, those of us involved in this work, until the fall, until the Paris Agreement that was just mentioned, which once again gave us hope that we could perhaps slow down the process of the impending disasters. Adaptation is what to do to live with climate change. Regional effects, regional actions. Some parts of the country will live with drought and a diminishing water supply, increasing fires. Others live with flooding. We, of course, are concerned about sea level rise, and we have 3 adaptation steps: defending, accommodating, and retreating, and I would say that we have been accommodating some of it, living with flooding that's increasing, but we're also beginning to defend certain parts of our region. The retreat scenario is a very interesting one, and I'll come back to that a little bit later. In that committee that Harvey Rubin started, we did a very thorough look at both mitigation and adaptation, what the effects are, what are the types of vulnerabilities, and who are the agencies or individuals, entities that might begin to deal with it. This is a very thorough look at every single aspect of it, just really to understand it. It's not yet a plan, but it's a way of understanding it. At the same time, in the various universities here at the University of Miami, as well as FIU, FAU, and others, faculty and students have been working on processing the ideas and exploring potential. We have decision path factors to deal with. They're geographic issues. By the way, in about 10 slides, I'm giving you something that's usually takes 70. So if you don't understand the sequence, I'd be happy to explain it further later. But they're geographic issues. Some places will receive flooding earlier than others. They're economic issues. Decisions will have to be made according to a degree of investment probably will play a role. And then there are also, of course, the political decisions of how you prioritize spending and the timing of applying funding, among other things. The geographic scenarios borrow from New Urban Ideas, the Transect of Scenarios. This is our transect of different geographies. There are really 8 different conditions of flooding or surge or high ground that all need to have different kinds of treatment. I mentioned the South Florida Regional Compact. This is 4 counties who come together every year and work together to share information and to share initiatives. We've also, many of these ideas entered our Resilient Communities Plan, 750. This can be seen under 750.org, a 7-county, 50-year plan funded by the federal government and run by 2 regional planning councils. I'd like to divert slightly, though, because in this picture of planning the future, one of the model, I'm out of time. I'm almost done. One of the model documents is that which was produced after Hurricane Sandy in New York. So the studies continue in South Florida, but a part of our region is not waiting for the studies, and Miami Beach is already building pumps, raising streets, moving buildings, and you'll hear more about that in a moment. So I would like to leave you with one idea moving forward, which, you know, I mentioned that mitigation is universal and shared. We can all do the same things. Adaptation is regionally specific. Generally speaking, what we do down here, we can't really learn from New Orleans or Holland, for instance, because we have a different geology. But recently it occurred to me that there really is one adaptation strategy that is global, and that may be something that Habitat could address. And that would be, how do you move people and their businesses out of the places that are unsafe, where they are vulnerable, and how do you move them to more resilient locations? Thank you.
So as he comes, let's give another round clap for Liz for starting us off. Such a great discussion. We next have Katie Hagemann, and she is from Miami-Dade, the Sustainability Initiative Coordinator.
So I'm Katie Hagemann. I work in Miami-Dade County at the Office of Resilience, which is a relatively new office. Previously, we were the Office of Sustainability. So my work within the office focuses mostly on sea level rise. So I'll just talk a little bit about some of those specifics of that work. So for those of you who were here last time, I was standing here talking about why we're seeing the sea level rising, and it's in part because of the changes that we've made through environmental alteration to the atmosphere and to the ocean, that we're seeing our dynamic systems responding to those forcings. So for example, last year, the Gulf Stream slowed during the fall, during October, which is this warm current that runs up the eastern seaboard, which caused locally exaggerated sea level rise. From a global perspective, the biggest contributor moving into the future for sea level rise is going to be our ice sheets. And that's the most important component for South Florida as well, to think about how those changes may be thought of as irreversible on a human scale, because these ice sheets take tens to hundreds of thousands of years to build up, but they can melt more rapidly. So what we've seen so far is that because we've changed the composition of the atmosphere and the average temperature of the atmosphere, we've also caused associated changes in the temperature of the oceans. And those are driving forcings leading to a reduction in the mass of the ice sheet. So this we can see here is a change, the loss of mass in Greenland. The red are areas where they're losing the most mass, and that's mostly on the edges, but also increasingly into the interior. So we can see that from 2004 to 2014, there's been quite a change, and that corresponds on the right axis to a change in our global sea level. So right now the condition that we have, though, is that our ice sheets are out of equilibrium with the environmental conditions of our atmosphere and the ocean temperature. So in the same way that when you take ice cubes out of your freezer and put them in a glass on the counter, the ice doesn't melt instantly. It takes a while for it to reach equilibrium with its environment, but eventually it does melt and reach equilibrium. So we're in a period now where the ice sheets are out of equilibrium and trying to sort of catch up to the new conditions that we've caused. But it's a big question mark as to how quickly they'll do that, because these are very complex systems. We have continents of ice with mountains and crevices and a whole hydrology. So that's why we're seeing a relatively slow sea level rise to date. We have about 100 years of record from Key West, and we see over that time period that the sea has risen about 2.3 millimeters per year, plus or minus. But those changes, though they seem small, mean that every high tide that we're seeing is now also affected by those long-term changes. So this is data from last fall. We expected the tides to be the blue line, which would fall a little bit above this box, which is the usual range of high and low tide. But instead, we saw the tides along this red line much higher than what was predicted. So the question for scientists, and where most of the research is focusing on, is how that ice will respond to these new conditions. So we have gotten scientists together through the compact to create regionally specific projections for what we can expect here. So we can expect likely between 6 to 10 inches in 2030, or 14 to 26 inches looking further out to 2060. But you'll see there are multiple curves here, in part because of those scientific questions, some of that scientific uncertainty, and also importantly because it depends on how much we continue to pollute or how much we can accelerate the mitigation and stabilize the changes that we're causing, and hopefully stay along a slower trajectory, which will make all of the adaptation work here much easier and much more graceful. So one of the challenges that we have in South Florida, others have alluded to, is because the ground is porous, it means that it's more difficult to keep the water outside the bounds of the city, as they would in the Netherlands or in New Orleans, constructing walls, because the water can permeate in. So walls here aren't as effective. We have to think about other mitigation strategies besides just sort of sealing off the urban area and trying to pump the water out. As alluded to by Professor Plater-Zyberk, we also have a unique condition where our inland areas, some in the south and the west, are also vulnerable to flooding. So it's not just a coastal phenomenon, because as the average water level rises, it affects the entire network of how water runs through the system and how we drain water regionally and even at the neighborhood scale. So we have a number of initiatives that are continuing. As mentioned, we have the Climate Action Plan within Greenprint. We have the Compact and other things. We also have just joined the Rockefeller 100 Resilient Cities, which is really exciting because this is a network that puts us in close contact with a number of cities. So these cities have many different challenges. Obviously, Juarez, Mexico, and Honolulu, there are a number of differences to our condition, but they all share the sort of same macro level challenges of urbanization and climate change and equity. So the framework for the 100 Resilient Cities asks each city, or a group of cities, in our case with the city of Miami Beach and the city of Miami, to look at the chronic stresses, in our case, sea level rise, inequality, and the acute shocks of hurricanes and other things that might crop up. And to think about how we can be more resourceful, more inclusive, more integrated, more flexible in how we respond to those. So their concept of resilience isn't just that our infrastructure is constructed at the right elevation and that our power stations will stay dry during the hurricane. It's also about the economy and society. Are we helping our residents meet their basic needs and be healthy and well? Are we integrating these concepts into our governance structure? Is it part of our leadership? And of course, also, is it part of our infrastructure and our environment? So the most important part for us is that we'll be part of this network, and we'll get to work with cities that have similar challenges. So Jakarta is probably the city most challenged by sea level rise, in part because their city is sinking so quickly. Rotterdam is another member, and they also have a lot of challenges that we can share, but a lot of investment in research and innovation, which we can and do borrow from already. And this is an example from Rotterdam where they have a floodable sculpture park, which in wet times can hold extra water, and in dry times is a promenade and a public space. This is a picture from Norfolk, and we just had them here last week. These are ideas coming out of Boston and a firm called Sasaki. New Orleans also has made headlines with the challenges, but their urban water plan is also a very inspiring document about how to use water as an amenity, how to create public spaces and more connectivity between neighborhoods that have been traditionally kept separate. So even though we have a lot of challenges, we're also not alone. So I just wanted to talk about one project we had last week, or 2 weeks maybe, in the northern part of the county. This spans multiple municipalities and unincorporated Miami-Dade. We had experts come join us from Norfolk, from Boston, from New York, from other places, and lend their sort of brain trust to us to think through this neighborhood. It's not really a neighborhood, but think through this geographic area, how we could adapt. So it was chosen in part because it has a high clustering of repetitive loss properties. So each yellow dot is a property that suffered multiple flood claims. The green areas that you can see there are areas that are built below the county flood criteria. So those will be well below the FEMA and FIP criteria as well. And not surprisingly, the low-lying areas that are green are also the areas where you see the flood claims. So this area has been very affected by flooding. This is flooding just from an unnamed storm, just an afternoon thunder shower that happened to drop 100 years worth of rain in this neighborhood. And in some cases, the water is up to the window for one resident. The residents in this area have applied for funding from FEMA to get mitigation funding and to move out, but because of the programs being taxed with the Sandy and others, they haven't been able to get that funding as of yet. So just to talk about the design aspect, so this is one cluster inland, far away from the coast, that's been affected by these changes. You can see that the green areas are low and the cluster of repetitive losses. So if we step back and look at the topography, you can see that this is very low-lying area where the creek traditionally meandered. At the red triangle by the creek, you can see it's now been underground, put underground and culverted, but the water still finds its way to the old creek bed when it rains. But one of the challenges is that when you stand there on an average day, this is in unincorporated Miami-Dade, you can't really see those features that are so visible when you look at the topography. The grid system goes north-south, 90 degrees. It's not intuitive that there are occasionally 3 feet of water in this neighborhood. So the designers came and thought through the system of hydrology, how they could redesign this neighborhood to allow the hydrologic function to come back, if not the natural condition, but also how people move through this space. And you can see that the railroad cuts through and the transportation line shown in red. So looking at the historic imagery, you can see the historic creek bed. Looking at the topography, you can see those islands in brown where we have the highest and best ground and how we can think about those as opportunities. So the ecologist that was on the team talked about how the sloughs and tree islands and the natural environment worked before we were here and altered the landscape. And how, so you can see here where that creek was. But as we developed, the development happened sort of independently from that natural functioning. So how could we find a hybrid situation where you can return some of that necessary water storage and conveyance, but also noting that you have an existing community. So how could you use voluntary land swaps or other mechanisms to help the people that are in an unsafe place that would like to move to higher ground to help facilitate that change? So finding more density in the best land. So their proposal was to use what's going to be hopefully a future transit stop in the city of North Miami on 125th, and to think through how we could encourage not just transit-oriented development, but they use the term ETOD, or equitable transit-oriented development, arguing that the market rate housing would probably come with a new transit stop, but that we could be more proactive in encouraging the affordable housing ahead of that, knowing that the market rate housing might take care of itself. So this is just one example. Unfortunately, this site will also be the site of Resilient Redesign this year, which University of Miami School of Architecture has offered to help us host. So we'll be looking forward to taking these concepts even further this November and thinking through this spot. So if anyone has any questions, I'll just switch to the last slide because I'm out of time for my contact details. Thanks.
Thank you. Katie. Our next speaker up is Amy Knowles, who is the Deputy Resilience Officer for the City of Miami.
Hello, everyone. It is such a pleasure to be here today and really kind of representing one of our local cities. And I really want to thank some of the speakers this morning who really highlighted the work that local governments do, and I can assure you that we're working really hard on this. And so what I'm going to share with you today is really some of our issues that we're having and how we're addressing it and how we are trying to operationalize resiliency within a huge government organization. Just to sort of frame the discussion, the concept of shocks and stresses is such a great one, and that's already been covered, so I won't do that again, but I will say for a city to pause and define what their shocks and stressors are is really important and can help really inform all the decision making from there. If we don't really sort of prepare and address these issues, our assets are going to be either inundated, are really not prepared to handle our public, our visitors, our residents, and it's all about the people in the end. I mean, if we don't have people that have places to live and have a great quality of life, that's going to affect many different things. Insurance, we have a bubble on here for insurance because that is really such a huge issue in South Florida. And we want to make sure that folks can stay in their homes, be well insured, so that really we can have our property taxes and ensure that continued, I would say, revenue source for governments so we can further invest and address our shocks and stresses. So I feel that we're very fortunate in Miami Beach because we've had a lot of investment, and we have to keep that going because while we are spending money, we can always spend our money better and really have co-benefits and all sorts of synergies that come along with good planning. A little bit about Miami Beach, just to set the stage. We are 7 square miles. We have about 90,000 residents, and as many of you know, that doubles every day with commuters and tourists, and we're a very busy city. We are very low, and we have a relatively flat terrain. We're man-made islands, And we had a mangrove swamp 100 years ago is what Miami Beach looked like. And so when I think about our sea level rise projections and we talk about the year 2100, just think about 100 years ago, we were a mangrove swamp. So we tend to look at Miami Beach in a very positive way in terms of how we can incrementally adapt and really respond to these sea level rise challenges. A little bit of our cross-section is on here, and many people don't know this, but the bay side, actually the west side of Miami Beach, is the most vulnerable. It's actually the lowest at about 2.4 feet. And then it progressively gets a little bit higher to the east, to the beach side, where that is actually the most resilient part of our beach. We have a great network of dunes. We have a very large beach, and that's actually the highest area. So I always like to point that out, a bit interesting. One of the things we have done, and I'm sure many of you have seen, we have a real aggressive stormwater program. We are raising roads. We do have stormwater pumps and many more to come. And all of that has been focused on the bay side, on the west side of the beach. I talked about people right in the beginning, so it's really important to us to maintain our culture, and so much of our culture is our housing. So really looking at whether it's MIMO, the Mediterranean Revival, or the Art Deco, this really compromises, or this is our quality of life. This is a big reason why people come to Miami Beach, to see to Miami Beach, and part of the challenging part is that these are some of our most vulnerable areas. We have many different historic districts. It comprises about 20% of our land mass, but when we look at the contribution to our property taxes, it's about 36%. So, highly vulnerable, but also highly valuable. So that is one of our challenges, to really look at these areas and see how we can begin to adapt them over time, recognizing it's not simple and not easy to lift a concrete building that is, 80 years old. And we actually have been in discussions with Dr. Cho, I see her over there, to really begin to work with us as a city to look at what are the different characteristics of these properties, doing an inventory, working with the community to have the discussions of, over time, we may not be able to, or we may not want to save every single building, but how do we prioritize and really have personal adaptation approaches for each of these different properties. So we're excited about that. We've talked about resilience, and I have this sort of slide up here because we not only believe that it's about growing in the face of shocks and stressors, but it's also about thriving. And so as we approach resiliency, everything that we do, thinking long term, we want to have benefits now in the short term. And that is, it's really important, because the better you do resiliency planning, the better your emergency management plan is as well. A little bit about our shocks and stressors. So I mentioned, and I know that Katie mentioned, 100 RC, the 100 resilient cities, and it really, to apply to that, you have to pause and define these for your city. So for us, of course, our shocks are hurricanes, we all know that, infrastructure failure, flooding, and then some of those longer term stresses, sea level rise, affordable housing, and transportation. And much about our planning is really focused on those issues. So I want to talk a little bit about what we're doing to address these. Miami Beach Rising Above is our approach to resiliency. It is our resiliency strategy. And it's how we're organizing all of our efforts. I do think it's important, in my career, I very much focused on organizational development. It's one thing to sort of issue a goal, to have different actions that need to be done, but if, as many of us have been in large organizations, if there's not a structure in place to focus on the most relevant issues and keep people moving forward, it's not going to happen. Building capacity, I heard Anna Marie mention that this morning, and that's very much of our focus. If your staff doesn't understand sea level rise or these issues, there's no way they can actually implement it. So our formula is taking our former sustainability plan, which really is a tremendous plan to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, combine that with our strategic planning model that's in place in Miami Beach, adding again in all of the work that's been done to date in terms of raising roads and all this good work, and we're calling that our Miami Beach Resiliency Strategy, and I'll show you how that's being expanded. We do already have a vision, mission, and values, as many organizations do. We look at an environmental scan once a year. It's a nice thick book of data, and we're adding into that resiliency information, everything from affordable housing issues and the cost of rent to our greenhouse gas emissions as well. That information is all feedback into our budget, which is really prioritizes everything that happens in the city. But what we're looking to do is to update all those different inputs so that everyone is considering resiliency. And I'll walk you through that a little bit. So in terms of our timeline, we launched our strategy this winter, and what we're focusing on now is really an assessment. We're looking at our strengths and capabilities. What are we doing well? What are we doing that we can build upon? What are our challenges and gaps? What are we doing to address all these things? Let's not forget those good actions that are taking place. So from out of that, we're taking our key themes, and that's really the basis of our resiliency strategy. We're going to have goals, initiatives, and we're collecting them as we go along. And one of the things I mentioned was that implementing. So as we do this, we're monitoring, evaluating, and we want to make sure we have a system in place that the stuff doesn't fall by the wayside. And then we'll look at doing annual reporting as well. You know, while we're planning, many of us in government don't have the sort of the ability to just plan and do nothing else. So we call this our immediate application of learning. We're very much focused on learning, doing, and planning. We do have a team, a resiliency planning team, of 18 different people from departments all over the city. We have 58 different assessment areas, everything from affordable housing to the economy to the environment that we're studying, grabbing any data that we can find. We're looking for about 10 years of data to say, what are these trends, what's happening out there, and what does it mean to us? We did do a survey of our management team to really understand what is their awareness of climate change, what do they need within their organization. And it was interesting, one of the things they told us is that they need training. They need more training, they need to understand it. And so we have invited different folks from the Climate Change Compact to come down and teach the sea level rise projections. We've done Climate Change 101 to help understand sort of that mitigation side, and we'll continue to do that. We do have a blue ribbon panel on sea level rise. It's very active. They're very much focused on historic preservation. They are focused on our different land use amendments. They're focused on our flooding program, and we're meeting with them about every 2 to 3 weeks. And that is great because it's an external group that's really helping move the agenda forward. We have a consultant that we are working with, AECOM, in the resiliency area, and I'll walk through a couple of things we're doing with them. And again, all of this is feeding our planning process as well. Covered this already, and I know my time's going out, but all of this for us comes together in creating this resilient city. And I know that Katie already showed you resilient system qualities, but we actually just took these 7 qualities and integrated them into a resilient and sustainable purchasing policy that we'll be presenting this week to our commission to really say in everything we do, we need to be considering these factors. How are we being reflective in how well we've done and how we can do in the future? How can we integrate this approach across all of our departments and work with, you know, our regional partners as well? So how do we do this? Last week we held a vulnerability assessment with our staff. We had 40 different employees from about 17 different departments to come together to learn Climate Science 101, to learn about our vulnerability, and to brainstorm on how we can kind of change things. So this is just one example of a checklist idea where we can take our GIS mapping capabilities and make them available to staff and really make sure that we're making informed decision making for our own city facilities as well as for the community. You know, what is floor elevation? What's happening in the land use area? What kind of census data? What is our socioeconomic information in that area? How critical is the facility? And to make sure as we are working, we're doing things properly. If we're going to replace an AC system, how can it be the most sustainable as well as the most resilient in terms of raising it or making sure we're thinking about our flooding issues? We looked at the science, so this just shows a scenario that we presented, and this is just one of many, looking from 2030 to 2100, and really showing the parts of our city that would be the most vulnerable. And we did a fun, not so fun, but an exercise to say, if we have a certain amount of sea level rise, if we add on a certain amount of king tide, which happens a couple of times a year, and the sea gets a little bit higher, and if we add on a Category 3 storm, what would the beach look like? And what areas are the most vulnerable? So that was a huge aha moment for, I think, everybody in the room to understand what we're facing and how they need to think a bit differently. This is one of our parks that is, much of Miami Beach is built out. It's very urban, but this is a park that's being redeveloped. And so with that information, we had about 5 people around a table from very different departments sort of redesigning what this project should look like. It should have stormwater retention. It can have natural wetland areas. We'll be raising it to different elevations and have kind of little hills, which is very different from Miami. And really just thinking, how do we develop differently rather than one capital improvements director sort of making those decisions or getting feedback through email. And this is just, and I'll close with this, with Operationalizing Strategy. This is a new project manager that we have, and he kind of looked at me and said, listen, with our facilities, we're doing none of this right now, and we really need to. So we need a checklist. So for our property management, for ourselves, it'd be very easy to really look at, is this in a flooded area? How many times has it flooded? How do we need to think differently as we design our projects? And with that, thank you very much, and appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you, Amy. Our next presenter will be Hana Escrow, who is with the Florida Market President of Gorman USA Developers.
Hi, I'm Hana Escrow. I'm the Florida Market President with, it's actually Gorman and Company. Unfortunately, our web address is gormanusa.com, so we get that a lot. We're affordable housing developers. We're in 6 states. We probably own about 70 affordable housing projects, and they are primarily financed by low-income housing tax credits, which means we're serving people making 60% median family income and below. Jose asked me to speak here because we are now on our 3rd project in the Florida Keys. And as some of you know, the state legislature in the early 70s designated the Keys as an area of critical state concern, which means they recognize the environmental sensitivity of the Keys along with the development of developmental pressure in the Keys, and wanted to regulate that development and recognize that environmental significance. So the primary way the state is doing this is with ROGO's, Rate of Growth Ordinance. They only allow a certain number of new residential and commercial, but I'm focused on residential units, to be built every year. There's right now an 8-year waiting list for market rate units down there. There's several hundred unused affordable units. The challenge with the affordable units is what folks who can afford in the workforce can pay for those units, and what the development costs to develop those units means significant subsidy. So while it looks like it's great, there's affordable, everybody should run to affordable, you literally cannot afford without significant subsidy to build down there for the workforce. The workforce is a tourist-based economy, right? You and I go down, actually I don't anymore, I go down and see a construction problem down there, but you go down, you think of it as a vacation home, right? It is tourist-based. Well, as we know, as Miami is a tourist-based economy, folks don't make that much money down there. Median house price down there is $450,000. It's a very expensive place to live. There are literally buses, resorts have buses taking people from Homestead to their resorts and driving them back. So people are commuting 4 hours a day to work down in the Keys. So we've got 3 properties down there. This is a property at mile marker 82, and I'm the person who now takes all these regulatory ideas and tries to get them built, right? That's what we're doing down there. So if you look at this property, what you notice the most is it's up on stilts. In order to get out of the floodplain, and X is my favorite flood zone, in order to get out of the floodplain, we had to bring these properties up, we had to bring the buildings up 9 feet. So we had to get to 9 feet. So the low level of the property, we really did have to go up 9 feet. We were able to, as the property sloped up, not bring them up as high. Stilts are insanely expensive. We have 9 rock ties literally in every single pier. Very, very expensive. The other things that we opted to do on here is to put metal roofs. Metal roofs are much more durable in a storm. And I don't know if those of you who were here in 2004, 2005, you could not get a shingle to save your life down here. So we wanted to build something where it was durable, it was sustainable. The problem with doing these stilts is what happens if you have mobility issues? You got to climb those stairs. So that's really a challenge in this. We have 20% of these units are accessible. So this is a 36-unit property, all 3 bedrooms, serves families making $51,000 or less in the Keys, which is considered 60% median family income. But it's really a challenge. So we had to put elevators in 8 of these units, so 4 of the duplexes. So what happens when you put elevators in there is your flood insurance now considers that you have habitable space below the flood level. So our flood insurance, and this is, speaking of the Miami Beach flood issue, our flood insurance on those units that don't have the elevators is $400 a year. Those units that have the elevators is $2,200 a year. Our insurers do not go, oh, how nice you're doing affordable housing, we'll just lower your flood insurance. Forget it, right? $2,200 is a lot of money when you're doing a rent-restricted property. Your expenses are incredibly high. And one other thing just to point out, if you guys look at these stairwells, do you see the stairwells coming by? You notice how they're all open? We originally had those covered, and we had a door at the bottom of them. So the door at the bottom became your front door, and then we had them covered, so you had covered walkway. Well, our flood insurance was $2,200 on every single building, so now our folks unfortunately have to walk up stairs that are open. There's just nothing we could do about it, but it is one of those issues. Oh, I'm already at 5 minutes. Oh my gosh. Okay, it's one of those issues that we really have to deal with in these projects. One other accessibility issue that, when we're conflicting between resilience and accessibility, and that's what we're doing in these units, is transoms for the doors. So we have sliding glass doors on all of these properties. What you want is the sliding glass door to slide between a pretty high transom so it keeps the water out. It's not accessible. So we're always balancing our accessibility and our resilience issues on how to deal with these accessibility issues. This was actually our first project in the Keys. This is a DPZ design project, and if you look at it, it's all one level, which is terrific because that helps us with our accessibility issues. 8 feet here is the flood level, and we brought in enough fill to bring it up to 8 feet. Now that we're on our 3rd project, I honestly think that we should have brought in about 3 more feet of fill, and just raise it up. But it was our first project. We didn't understand that. Again, we did metal roofs. One of the things, and Liz can tell me if this was planned or not, but one of the things I like about this project, and it's hard to tell, but those are courtyards, and you can see the walls going up. We've done a lot in there to give people space, but also protect them from the wind and from those kinds of, flying objects towards your windows. So I really like that in this project. Well, this is another 36-unit project. One of the things that we discovered is that because we have accessible units, particularly in this project, but also in our other project, is that we were getting seniors. This is supposed to be workforce family. These are large units. We're ending up over-housing our seniors because they needed accessible units in the Keys. And if you go through the Keys, everything's up on stilts. So for our 3rd project, we decided, and it looks curved, it's because the camera was coming off of a crane. This one is under construction right now. This is a senior project. And what we wanted to do is really take our seniors so that our workforce could live in our workforce housing and bring our seniors up for this housing. This housing, for what we've done, is we've done all internal corridors on this one because we wanted to make sure we didn't have our transom issues and accessible issues. We really wanted to make sure people were housed, they had accessible housing, they had interior corridors, and this is one that they can age in place in the Keys. There's literally only one other rent-restricted property in the entire Keys, this one for seniors. This one's at mile marker 105. The other one is in Key West. That's it in the entire Keys. So we really are trying to design a place where folks, we've got social services office, where people, and a nurse's office, where people can age in place in the Keys. If you look at this one, this is under construction. These are concrete planks. So there are concrete planks literally between each floor. You can see the piers. We have 216 piers on this project that go 11 feet down. The water table is about 5 feet below this, so we really had to get down into the ground. This project, if there's a hurricane, I'm coming here, and I'm sitting in the corridor. Between the concrete planks, the concrete masonry, the tie-downs, the roof has got concrete planks and 2 inches of concrete on the top of it. I'm going here, I'm just gonna sit in the corridors. It's not, we've got hurricane windows, just nothing's happening with this one. But the challenge with this one, and I just want to do this, is price. You know, this is a very, very, very resilient building. These are 750 square foot units. Our construction alone is $165,000. That's construction alone. That doesn't include my permit fees, my engineers, my architects, anything like that. It's just, it's insanely, insanely, insanely expensive to build down here, and you just can't do it without subsidy. If you look, speaking of mangroves, with a picture with the piers up there, that's the mangroves right there. We're literally right on the edge of the mangroves. One of our biggest issues, remember I said, oh, if we had to do blue water again, I would bring in a bunch of fill. I wanted to bring in 3 more feet of fill. I did. I wanted to raise this one. 9 feet is the flood level. The highest we could go is 9.4 inches, 9 feet 4 inches. In the Keys, regulation says you can only be 35 feet from the crown of the road. So they would not let me raise this thing several feet because we then were out of zoning regulation. So there are real regulatory issues there. And I think I'm out of time. But this is the last one. This is actually in Pasco County, and I want to point this one out. This one was a property that was built in around 1980. It was built in a former lake bed. It's a Section 8 rent subsidized property, and honestly, I think they just said they could put the poor people in the lake bed and we'll just build housing there. It's a really, really a challenge property. We literally took the unit configuration, moved it a mile away. It's now in an X flood zone. It's up on a hill. And we just moved literally all of those residents out of this property and into this property last month. This to me is true resilience. We got them out of that flood zone. So this is the new property right there. So there's my contact information. How far over was I? Oh, good. Okay, thank you.
And for everybody, her information for her company is actually correct in the bio. It was just wrong on my paper. It's Gorman and Company Incorporated. Our final speaker, and I know we're all sad to hear this because our panel is ending. It's such good dialogue. Is Isabel Casio Carballo. She was Executive Director for South Florida Regional Council.
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Jose, thank you again for inviting me to be part of this great group. I've already learned so much. I scribbled all over my presentation. I'm going to start giving somebody else's probably as with the notes. And it's great to see so many friends here. Again, my name is Isabel Casio Carballo. I'm the Executive Director of the South Florida Regional Council. I've been at the council since 1996, so it's a great place to work. And for those of you who may not be familiar with the regional council's region is Monroe, Miami-Dade, Broward counties. There's 10 councils of the state, so we're all covered by regional councils, and we are charged by working on a regional scale, looking at issues long-term. We're at that sweet spot between the local and state and a bridge for partners working in the middle. So again, I'm delighted to be here, and my presentation is going to be a little different. As you see, we have really great experts that really know a lot about the climate change and resiliency. And so while we work in that space as well, I've been asked to speak about something else. So, and I'm delighted to just sort of take a step back, and I'm so happy that Administrator Jennings is here. He was one of the first folks that I saw back in 2010 when our region was selected a U.S. HUD Sustainable Community. That was probably one of the proudest moments in the work that I've done at the council, when our 7-county region, with the help of many of you, was selected one of 45 communities, inaugural HUD Sustainable Communities. And that was a really great moment, because at that time, even though we were working regionally, it wasn't really so formalized. And this was the first time that our region, broader, 2 regional councils, 7 counties, recognized that we are connected by our people, our water, our transportation, our economy, our housing. We are very much connected, all of our communities, and that the diversity of our communities is a strength. We don't all have to be the same, but we need to all be talking and working together. So through that process, we adopted the Livability Principles, which frankly are the ones that seem logical to me for the Habitat meeting as well. I thought HUD and EPA and DOT did a really great job with these principles. And so you see that transportation choices, equitable housing, economic competitiveness, existing community, supporting our existing community, working together so that 1 + 1 is 3, as the HUD secretary would say, and valuing our communities and neighborhoods. And then one very unique to Southeast Florida we added was to enhance community resiliency to the impacts of climate change. So that was a special thing that we did for ourselves. So a key part of the work, and this is what's going to inform a little bit of my conversation, and I'll try not to talk on too long, but a key part of our work was the Fair Housing Equity Assessment. This was so important for HUD that this was actually the only mandatory deliverable out of our cooperative agreements with the agency nationwide. Everybody had to do this. And what it did is it let us go back and take a step back and look at our region today, our communities today. And through an assessment, we used 30 different criteria. We sort of came up with a ranking of, how are communities doing? What we saw is that some communities were doing very well, some were not doing so well, and others were in the middle. They were sort of could go either way. And we said, it's very important that we have fairness and inclusion in our communities, because we recognize that it is through that fairness and the inclusivity that we all prosper and grow together. So it's not only that it's the right thing to do, but also that it's the smart thing to do. And so the definition that we used was that it's a fair and just inclusion where everyone can participate and prosper, basically irrespective of where you come from. So anyone should have the opportunity to maximize their potential, but we all have to recognize that we don't all start from the same place. And that's where public policy and investment and foundations and other groups come in to make sure that we are making smart investments to lift everyone up. And it's through this that we can maximize our potential as people, as a community, and our economy. And it's the human infrastructure. We talk a lot about physical infrastructure, but it's important to remember that our greatest asset are our people, and that if we don't invest in our people, we're not going to go very far. One of the things we know from the Pew Charitable Trust is 43% of Americans, that are raised at the bottom of the income let me look at my word here, ladder, and they use quintiles. So bottom line is that we have this idea of the American dream that it doesn't matter where you start. If you work really hard, you're going to get ahead. That's just the way it is, and that's the dream that we hold on to. And it's true in some respect, but the odds are a little bit against you. If you're born at that bottom part, the odds are that 43% of you are not going to get out. So, you have to balance those things. And there's things that contribute to what makes people successful in life. And it's family, community, education, health, the human capital, as well as financial capital, having the wherewithal to earn and save and invest. And it's all these factors working together that really make a difference. So through our work with the HUD Sustainable Community Grant, we were very fortunate. We were one of the communities that was selected for an equity profile that again looked at factors in our region, and we learned a lot there, like speaking about housing, that we are one of the least, we're actually the #1 least affordable place in the United States to live. And there were many things that were eye-opening there. And we also had, again, the Fair Housing Equity Assessment by Karis Consulting, who did our work. And he brought out a lot of interesting information that was very important. I think that one of the things is, why does this matter? Well, in Southeast Florida, it matters a lot. And the policy framework that was used by PolicyLink in the University of Southern California was they looked at demographics, economic vitality, readiness, and the part that I'm building up, the part that I'm supposed to be talking about, connectedness, and how do we connect people to opportunity. And it's very important. If you look in our region, what we know is that we're a region that is at the forefront of the country. We are changing and growing every day. And I think this slide by PolicyLink really tells a big story, which is, you can see right here from 1980 how we've changed and how we've grown in diversity. We're leading the nation. And this is important because when you look at the equity profile by PolicyLink, what you see is that all communities don't perform equally. This is broad brush. It doesn't mean everybody follows this thing. But generally, if you're looking, what you find is that communities of color tend to have more challenges. Their transportation's not as good. They may not have access to daycare as easily, or quality daycare. Educational performance may suffer. And it's not to say that this doesn't happen in in white communities. It happens too, but more here. And so we need to be thinking about that, because as our region continues to grow and our population shifts, we need to be very thoughtful about the investments we're making that is going to help close gaps in performance. So again, everyone can live their potential and be part of the region and the economy. It's, how do you grow prosperity? And so just a quick, since I thought you want to see this. Oh, I thought this is interesting. I just put it here, is that if you look at the population 0 to 4, this was in 2010 census, what you see is that the people that are making decisions about investment and policy, in large part, don't look like the people that they're making decisions for. So that's just something to think about, and I know y'all can sort of, extrapolate from there. So just here, the red on the far left, that's really the Everglades. But you can see here in Miami-Dade County, as you might expect, there's a lot of areas of low opportunity. And the way it was defined was, areas of low opportunities are communities where you don't necessarily, you don't have access to the things you need to be more successful. And part of the HUD Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing Rule is designed to create additional opportunity, connect people to opportunity. So you can see Miami-Dade, you can see Broward, you can see, and the orange is low, and you can see where those could go either way. They could get to moderate, and again, I'm a regionalist, so I'm going to show you Palm Beach as well. And so you can see we're all connected. We all have these things. So there's lots of different ways to measure opportunity and all different components that go into opportunity. So again, as we mentioned, there's financial capital, social capital, community capital, and there's mobility and connectivity and access to opportunity that way. So when we're thinking about these things, we need to use transportation. Transportation, frankly, is one of the key tools that we have, along with housing, because I think they have to go together. Transportation is one of the key tools we have to connect people to opportunity. Out of the our Sustainable Communities project that Liz was part of, I'm very happy to say, because we got one of the smartest people working on it. Out of that 750 plan, there were different recommendations that came out. Region in motion was one. We had alternative scenarios. We picked the way we wanted to move, the way we wanted to live. And what we said is we want a region where there's high quality transit, the good transportation, there's connectivity, everyone can move around, and it's not a nightmare. We wanted to make sure we were increasing access to opportunity by all segments of our community while thinking of all these things in the context and framework of climate resiliency and growing more resilient communities. And we also wanted to make sure we were taking care of the Everglades and our water supply, because again, everything's connected. So just some examples of region in motion. Here you see we have a lot of infrastructure. Of course, there's a million pictures you can put. It's not all complete, but you got to remember we have our rail, Metro Rail. This is a new plan that's coming out with my dear friend and colleague Eileen Bouclé, who's the new executive director of the Miami-Dade MPO. That board is moving forward with creating a strategic Miami area rapid transit smart plan. It's very exciting. It's been adopted by the commission, and so we're moving ahead. So I just want to show that will actually connect all the way to the Keys. Then, of course, you have Tri-Rail, major partner. You have the Tri-Rail system, the existing system, but there's also new work being done to create the coastal link, the Tri-Rail coastal link, which will connect us up from downtown Miami going all the way up to Jupiter. And then there's also additional initiatives with All Aboard Florida. You know, we have buses, complete streets. All these are components of a region in motion. And I put the picture of this development down here as we talk about TOD to remind everyone that when we're talking about housing and transportation, we have to be talking about the supporting land use. Because without the supporting land use, you don't really accomplish what you want. And so I'm sorry to say that I'm out of time, but as earlier speakers mentioned, it's very important to talk about systems and how we connect systems so that we can really make a change in the life of the people that rely on us to be thinking about these things and are part of the conversation. Let's not remember that we learn from our community members. And with that, thank you so much for your time.
So the schedule calls for a 15-minute break, which is now going to be a 3-minute break. So we're going to, we can do calisthenics together if you want to stretch, or you can use the facilities around the corner. But we're going to reconvene within 5 minutes. Okay, try to make up for some time. And also, we want to try to leave some time at the end of these panels for interaction with you. So, okay.